What's going on, guys? Hey, listen, we've got a cool video, man. Stuff is kicking off with Iran and the USA right now. Unless you live under a rock, you've probably seen on the news somewhere that there's now four US KIA service members, KIA, including a 19-year-old and a 20-year-old, I believe, and multiple wounded. There was a huge missile strike into an air base in Jordan from the Iranians, or from the IRGC technically. Anyways, it's kicking off. And this video, just watched a video from this guy yesterday. It's from this channel, Warfronts. Make sure you check them out. And it says, "Is a U.S. invasion of Iran coming soon?" And I think this is very, it's an important topic, but it's also very relevant right now. So I'm excited to watch this one. Real quick, please like, share, subscribe, obviously to Warfront channel, and then also this channel. We got a bunch of new people here. Thank you guys all for the love. And we don't usually stray away from Ukraine content, but when there's big stuff happening, we will check it out. So we're going to watch this. If you want a one of our t-shirts before the end of the month, we've got the flamingos over Moscow, which you guys seem to be loving, and also a lot of you guys have been picking up the American for Ukraine, which is a cool, it's our 4th of July special shirt. So that's all I got, I think. Yeah, I'm sure I'll remember to yap about more here in a minute. Let's go.
This is an episode that we'd have preferred not to have.
Oh, if I should remember, but yesterday I was making videos and there was a drone strike. It was they call them jet drones, but I believe it was like a Molnia style drone strike, just like a block away from me, from where my apartment is now. And here's some footage of it. It's really short, but I grabbed my medical bag and ran over there, make sure nobody was injured, because in some of these small towns, I'm in a small town, sometimes it takes emergency personnel a while to get there. So I was like, hey, I'm close, I see the smoke, so I just ran over there, tried to help, but nobody was wounded, so good thing. But I wanted to share that with you guys.
To make. The war between the United States, Israel, and Iran has been going on. This is an episode that we'd have preferred not to have to make. The war between the United States, Israel, and Iran has been going on for half a year at this point, and for most of that time, any sort of large-scale ground invasion seemed to be beyond the pale. Unfortunately, we're no longer at that stage. Trump has tried just about everything else, ranging from bombing, diplomacy, bombing, blockades, raising $300 billion for Tehran, and did we mention bombing? The Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed. Some ships are trying to get through, but 4 separate attacks were carried out yesterday alone, and it's becoming clear that the air and naval-only approach Washington's been trying to do is no longer cutting it. Which leaves President Trump with the worst choice he's faced thus far: either fully capitulate to Iran and allow the regime to set up tolls in the Strait of Hormuz, or escalate this war to a level it was never supposed to go.
Yes.
Invasion. The cheap way in. Now the
Unpopular opinion, I think invasion is the way to go. Either invasion or complete seclusion from the entire world. And I'm talking about not just a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. I'm talking about land blockades, basically surround Iran until they give up. The part that sucks about that is there's millions and millions of people in Iran that are innocent. So I'm a fan of the idea of going boots on the ground. I think we have the best military in the world for a reason, the United States. And I believe if you were to grab a U.S. Marine off the streets who's currently active and deployed out there in the Middle East, if you were to grab him and say, hey, do you want to go? Do you want to invade and fight? He would be like, yes, that's why I'm here. That's why I signed up, right? So
the place we're going to begin today's episode is both the cheapest option to achieve real change in Iran and also the least likely to succeed. And by the way, that's going to be a common theme throughout today's episode. The more likely it is that Washington could use a certain strategy to achieve its ultimate objectives, the more there will be to lose. When we say least likely to succeed, though, we don't mean that this is some pie-in-the-sky idea like parachuting Reza Pahlavi into downtown Tehran with the 82nd Airborne and setting up shop. No. Of all the different approaches that we're going to look at today, this is the only one that's actually been attempted before. Iran is often presented as the modern-day incarnation of the Persian Empire, and to an extent, that's true. But like any empire, the dominant majority, Persians, aren't the only people living there. The country is home to a significant number of ethnic minority groups, and they play quite the role in this story. There are the Balochs, who mostly live along the southeastern border with Pakistan. Then there is a healthy number of Arabs in Kyrgyzstan, and some Azeris along the border with Azerbaijan. For today's purposes, however, we're primarily going to talk about the Kurds, who are generally regarded as both the most well-armed and the best organized of the bunch. They have a real, if modest, fighting force, and a rare for the region, relatively unified political coalition standing behind it. None of them makes that a match for Iran's security services, who outnumber and outgun them many times over. But of all the insurgent movements scattered around Iran's edges, the Kurds were the only ones who looked anything like a force you could actually build a plan around. Back in the earliest days of Operation Epic Fury, this plan was actually put into motion, or at least America tried to put it into motion. The plan was to funnel tens of thousands of Kurds from where they had set up shop in Iraq back across the border into Iran, where they would then go on a march to Tehran under the cover of American and Israeli air power. From there, they were supposed to link up with former Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who, if reports are to be believed, had become a double agent for the Jewish state and would then take over the country. It was a bargain sale of regime change, if you will, or where there'd be extremely minimal or zero US forces present on the ground, and even though the Islamic Republic would go on to exist in some condition, it would be a shell of its former self. If all of that sounds like the plot of a James Bond movie, well, yes, it kind of is, and it went just about as well as you'd expect. The whole thing survived contact with reality for all of a few days in early March. In fact, there were issues with it from the get-go. The Kurds were less well-armed than Jerusalem and Washington had hoped for, and there were fewer combat-willing members in the coalition than expected. From there, things only got worse. Word of the operation leaked, which sent Washington and Jerusalem alike scrambling. Turkey, never willing to watch an armed Kurdish operation kick off anywhere, if it can get in the way, threatened to outright back Iran via the air if these plans went ahead. In the end, it seems, the US just cancelled the whole thing. And yet, in spite of all of that, the plan hasn't fully gone silent. This has become something of a self-fulfilling prophecy. The Kurds received so much coverage for being a potential wedge point against Iran that they're now concerned about regime reprisals when this all blows over. That makes any offer of air support hit a little different than it did back in February. Washington might be less inclined to actually embrace this approach, given the warming of relations with Turkey, but Israel, who has a highly sophisticated air force all of their own, might be able to step in and do this one themselves. So far, the prospect seems to divide Israeli officials. Netanyahu was a huge champion of it, and indications are that the country's intelligence service, Mossad, believed that it could have worked had Trump not vetoed the thing. It did, after all, get Israeli sign-off, so someone thought that it could work. That's certainly not a universally held position, though. Even Israel Katz, their defense minister, was left frowning and shaking his head skeptically when he was asked about the chance that it actually paid off. In general, though, you get what you pay for, and when it comes to Iran, it doesn't appear to be any different. So, if the cheap option isn't going to cut it, we have to move up a category. In just a moment, we're going to talk about America's other options, but before we get there, a quick pause to tell you all about our subscriber site, Fronts.co. Fronts.co is our outlet for all the stories that we don't have space to do justice here on the main channel, a place where we can dig deeper than we ever do on YouTube. Every week we upload 2 exclusive videos, 2 expert-written articles, a podcast or 2, all covering conflict and geopol stories that matter most to you. Often our coverage is focused on the war in Iran, but we also host plenty of other pieces on Ukraine, Sudan, the Sahel, the Indo-Pacific, and elsewhere, not to mention all the minor conflicts that the rest of the world tends to ignore. A subscription to Fronts costs just $5 a month or $50 a year. That's Fronts.co. Check it out. And now, back to it.
That sounds cool.
The Island Trap. And this is where things really start to get serious in terms of costs for the US, and with that higher price tag should come some greater chance of success. If the cheap way into Iran doesn't get off the ground, or if it does only to collapse under its own weight again, the next step up in terms of ground operations is almost certainly going to be the storming and occupation of some of Iran's islands in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. There are a lot of tiny ones out there with some Iranian military presence on them, but for all intents and purposes, the 3 big targets that the US might try to hit are Karg, Larak, and Qashm Islands. Karg Islands is the kind of crown jewel of the lot, and it's long been floated as a potential contender if you want to hit Iran where it hurts. Sitting just 25 kilometers off the Iranian coast, at a size of just 20 square kilometers, more than 90% of the Islamic Republic's oil supply flows through its terminal before that oil is exported abroad. It's
90?
quite a way to put all your eggs in one basket, so if Iran were to lose the island, it would be economically crippled in a way that we haven't really seen at any point during this war or before. In fact, it's such an important island, we dedicated a previous video to the subject back in March. Then there's Larak and Kashem Islands, which serve two distinct but related purposes. The former is more or less where Iran has set up its tolling operations, due in no small part to the fact that, geographically speaking, it's basically a watchpost over the Strait of Hormuz itself. There's a lighthouse on the island, plus radar systems, communication towers, and IRGC observation posts that allow it to reportedly give the guards visibility over virtually every tanker and warship transiting through the strait. But if Larak is the one who barks, Kashem is the one who actually bites. It serves as the IRGC's naval forward base of operations and has been nicknamed Iran's, quote, unsinkable aircraft carrier. It's the largest island in the Gulf and has more or less whatever the forces stationed there could need to attack or defend it. It's also a hub for the fast boats that have proved to be a constant thorn in the side of ships trying to get through Hormuz. Altogether, the three have basically been singing to war planners in Washington as a Persian equivalent of the sirens in Homer's Odyssey. But, as with the original story, it's set up by design to be a trap. Lure the Americans in, and once they're there, pounce. Realistically, the United States could probably take the islands, although it would certainly come at a cost. We're sure that the Iranians have done their best to lock these things down as tight as possible. Mines on both the shores and on the island itself. Heavy fortifications for defense should Marines deploy. You get the idea. Iran excels at asymmetric warfare, though, not conventional approaches like that, so we wouldn't be surprised if the US successfully takes one or multiple of them. The Pyrrhic part of that victory, however, would be...
I want to kind of just clarify something here, because I feel like it was kind of just kind of pushed through there. The US would absolutely storm those beaches and take all three of those islands without a doubt. There's no question if there's enough manpower or military power in the region. The question is, like he says, is how many casualties will it cost the US? And when you have number one, you have a country that's willing to fight dirty like Iran, they're already dug into these positions. They're defending. They have home field advantage, defender's advantage. They're going to have different sneaky ways to set ambushes and traps for the United States military personnel going in. But like he also just said, we have surveillance 24 hours on all three of these islands guaranteed. The unsinkable aircraft carrier he's talking about, the largest of the three islands, I'm sure it looks like the surface of the moon right now with how much it's been cratered with American missiles. So I don't know. In my opinion, I think take the three islands, make the three islands basically the staging areas for the larger invasion of Iran. And I know it sounds super warmongery, especially for me to start the video and say, well, I'm in favor. I think we should go in, and I'm not in the US military. It's easy to play armchair quarterback, right, from here in Ukraine. But I do believe it is almost any way you slice it, with the exception of American losses, would be a net positive for the world and for the United States. Because Iran has been such a problem for multiple decades at this point, they are the number one state sponsor of terror. It's kind of like cutting the main head off of a Hydra monster, right? If a Hydra has like a main, middle, most important head, it would be like cutting that off. And then ideally the rest of the heads kind of die as well.
What would come after Washington actually takes the islands. Remember, Karg Island is just 25 kilometers from Iran's shore.
And sorry, I will say this, then we'll keep it going. And I also think it's important. Another reason I am in favor of an invasion, a ground invasion, is because I think it's important to set the precedent that the West is still very strong and can do stuff like this. The West has looked very weak ever since the beginning of this. Well, for a while, I would say arguably since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion, where no country in the West decided to come into Ukraine and help. They sent supplies, they helped with finances, all that stuff. Yes, that is very, very good. But none of the countries were willing to put assets on the ground in Ukraine as far as boots on the ground. So I think that made the US look really, really weak because we're talking about a free country who has established borders since 1991, Ukraine, that is recognized internationally since 1991, full invaded by the second most powerful military in the world, or third, the Russian Federation, and the no Western country stepped in. So I think it made the West look very weak. It made the enemies of the West look, or the enemies of the free world realize, oh, we can get away with a lot more than we thought we could. So if we were to go full scale ground invasion into Iran, one of an enemy of the free world, I think it would set a precedent like, okay, hold on, maybe the US has some balls at the end of the day.
And the others aren't much further. Whatever forces take the islands would be absolute sitting duck.
Or grew their balls back. We know the US has balls, but it's looked bad. And since the beginning of this, we've been hammering them with missiles, and I'm sure it's been effective to some extent, but the way we've capitulated to Iran during these last 6 months it makes the US look weak.
For any incoming drones, missiles, or even artillery, which the Iranian military hasn't had the opportunity to use effectively until now. Speaking of drones, by the way, the drones that can operate at this range take video footage, and you need to only look at Ukrainian compilations of Russian soldiers during their final moments to imagine the videos that Iran could produce of American soldiers and Marines meeting the same fate. And given that Iran is now openly discussing...
That's true, but Iran doesn't have the same kind of military war machine and infrastructure that Russia does, where they can pump out, and logistics systems, where they can just pump out millions of these FPV drones, send them to teams that are established on the front. The IRGC is not on the same level as the Russian Federation, so it wouldn't be the same type of deal, but I guarantee unfortunately, we would see US soldiers on some of these FPV drone cams, because there has not been a solution to countering these drones at a wide scale effectively. We've already seen some of this footage of different terrorist organizations, Hamas, Hezbollah, using FPVs against Israel. We've seen footage of this.
How they're ready to welcome the US to the country if Washington decides to roll in. We're going to bet on all of the above when it comes to what the Islamic Republic would be sending their way. Despite these less than stellar conditions, such an operation seems to have genuine support in Washington. The late Senator Lindsey Graham repeatedly called for exactly this operation, and while he no longer has the president's ear, he clearly left an impression. Last Tuesday, Trump reportedly held a meeting in the Situation Room to discuss exactly this, and in an interview with Fox News, he told the outlet that the seizing of the island wasn't his first choice, but that, quote, if we degrade them far enough and deep enough back, I would do that. But taking a few islands is, at this point, closer to the modest end of what's on the table here. If Washington wants the Strait opened badly enough to send in troops at all, there's a version of this that goes much, much bigger. Beachfront property. So, as we go along today, it's important to keep our eyes on the prize. Washington would be doing this for one reason, and one reason only: getting traffic flowing through Hormuz again. If either of the previous options didn't strike you as enough to get the Islamic Republic to agree, then we do have one more thing to consider, because you're right, neither of the prior options is likely to get Hormuz open again. Not without Iran willing to play ball and make concessions, and nothing so far seems to indicate that they're willing to do that. When Trump began Operation Epic Fury, it was promised to be an air-only campaign. Trump himself had been a long-time critic of long, drawn-out misadventures in the Middle East, and had made waves back during the 2016 primary for criticizing the Iraq War, so any boots-on-the-ground style operation would be a hell of a U-turn. That said, Epic Fury...
It's true, and I don't blame any pro-Trump supporters, any Republicans who voted for Trump based off of that issue, because there's a lot of voters who are single issue voters. All they care about is immigration. All they care about is the economy. All they care about is foreign policy, like Iran. So I don't blame people for being upset about that at all. I don't think it's something that Trump should have talked about on his campaign trail. But at the end of the day, the U.S. started this. The U.S. has to finish this.
Was also pitched to be a 4 to 5 week operation, and here we are in month 5, not week 5. So when it comes to how Washington could actually force Hormuz open, there's one option left on the table. Iran, for context, is a fifth of the size of the entire continental United States and has roughly 1,700 kilometers of coastline along the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. No amount of American naval power could defend across that sort of range, as evidenced by the repeated strikes on commercial shipping that continue to happen even this week, 4 yesterday alone, by some reporting. Realistically, the only way to actually do this would be a ground invasion of the Iranian coastline. And it's not just us saying this. Jason Campbell of the Middle East Institute went on record saying, quote, "It's very difficult to envision any scenario where you could satisfactorily secure the Strait of Hormuz absent ground forces." Unlike either the Kurdish or island-based strategies, this wouldn't be some minor incursion. The exact numbers vary depending on who you ask, but estimates from RAND, the CSIS, and places like the US Naval War College tend to put the numbers required in the tens of thousands, potentially ranging into the hundreds of thousands. One estimate clocked in at one Marine Expeditionary Brigade, consisting of some 17,000 Marines, to take the port city of Bandar Abbas alone. So when you do the maths, given how much coastline really exists here, you start to get a sense of where the hundreds of thousands figure comes from. Just like with the island approach, though, this would leave US forces as essentially sitting ducks along the coastline. It's not often that you see a country invade another just along their coast, for good reason. In this situation, the entirety of the Iranian armed forces would be absolutely chomping at the bit to get in on the action. Essentially, absent from the war so far has been the Iranian Conventional Army, the Artesh, who consist of 350 to 420,000 soldiers alone, on top of the besieged militia and everything that the IRGC will be throwing at the United States. Unlike with the Kurdish operation, where Israel had been willing to play more of a role, Jerusalem has told Washington that it would be flying solo on the ground here. It's worth noting again that Iran has, so far, shown its military prowess in asymmetric warfare, especially through the use of drones, and seemingly not giving a damn how much it gets bombed. And while that's proven to be a winning strategy thus far, it still leaves a huge question mark around how that actually hold up in a land-based conventional battle with Washington. It may very well be that they're nowhere near as good as they are with drones, or it might be that they'd put up more of a fight than Washington is prepared for. Regardless, though, their ability to conduct asymmetric warfare against American positions throughout the country would continue essentially unabated unless Washington goes all out in a full, boots-on-the-ground operation aimed at total regime collapse. Iran has clearly been preparing for exactly the style of invasion. The country's entire defensive doctrine was built to survive the kind of decapitation strategy that the US has been pursuing, but also to survive this style of occupation. Even if you assume that the US can execute the operation along Iran's entire coastline, it just sets Washington up for a long and painful occupation, and one that Trump simply doesn't have the domestic political support to sustain. Oh, and did we forget to mention, Iran's planning other surprises for America too. Lately, Tehran has been floating the idea that if the US actually does come ashore, Iran will hit back elsewhere as well, specifically targeting Kuwait and Bahrain with what could amount to full-scale invasions. Ahmad Ardestani, an Iranian
Of what? The IRGC? Come on, dude. Those guys will just get... If they try to do a land invasion into an area that there's US military bases, they would just get annihilated.
Iranian MP who sits on their National Security Committee went on the record as saying, quote, "If the United States puts boots on the ground in Iran, we may also launch ground attacks on Kuwait and Bahrain." And look, the may there is doing a lot of heavy lifting and shouldn't be taken as a given, but if you know a thing or two about Iranian military strategy lately, they've been firing at just about everyone in the region. Every Gulf state has gotten caught up in the crossfire, but Kuwait and Bahrain are getting it much worse than all the others. Tehran has been pummeling both countries non-stop for the last week, including a recent strike on one of Kuwait's desalination plants. In this part of the world, water is basically liquid gold. 90% of Kuwait's drinking supply comes from desalination plants, along with 86% in Oman and 70% in Saudi Arabia. This type of destruction, if carried out on a major scale, would be absolutely devastating for the region and for US forces as well. There have been 17 total confirmed American fatalities in the war so far, the vast majority of whom were killed in the first stage. Last Friday, though, 2 soldiers were killed for the first time since April, both of whom were stationed in Jordan. First Lieutenant Tyler Feehan, 25, and Private Isabella Gonzalez, who is just 19. That death toll came without a single American boot on Iranian soil and would be guaranteed to go up dramatically if the US goes ahead with an operation like this. Thank you for watching.
Good video, man. Good coverage. So I wrote down a few things because I kept stopping it and I didn't want to piss you guys off. So I want to cover them now. Um, so another reason to back my opinion about supporting a ground invasion is the fact that I believe there will be, if there's not decisive action taken like this, like a ground invasion to remove the regime, take territory, secure land, then there will just be this constant slow drip of casualties and KIA of American forces for a long time. There we've seen this. This is none of this what's happening right now is new as far as the Middle Eastern conflicts. We've had 20 plus years of experience in this with all the GWAT stuff. So I do believe because terror organizations fight, as everyone likes to use the term, asymmetrically, it's hard to cut the head off of the hydra, right? Or cut the head off of a snake because it's more like a hydra. There's multiple heads. But what you could do is you could basically go in with a chainsaw and try to cut all the heads off of the hydra and eliminate it in one fell swoop, which I think would be the equivalent of a ground invasion. Rather than you cut one head off, you wait for it to grow back while you're cutting another head off, and then that one grows back, and then you go back to the first one and cut that one off, and then this one's attacking you over here. It's a losing strategy. Again, we've watched this play out. Will it cost casualties in KIA? Yes. There's no getting around that fact. Absolutely no. But will it what's the would it be a net positive still? Or would the net positive come from just allowing the slow drip of KIAs and casualties by kind of continuing this air and sea bombardment type thing we're doing now and just hoping that Iran will be like, all right, we're done. We'll come to the table and negotiate, which anybody who has half a brain cell knows Iran has never negotiated in good faith. They have never held up their end of any bargain that they've made with the United States. They're not going to now that they are more upset with the United States than ever. We literally killed their supreme leader. And then the second in command that was coming up and all of his cronies. And now they're on like their third tier of command who are just hiding deep in a hole somewhere. The dude doesn't even have legs or something. He's pretty badly wounded from one of the strikes. The Kurds. We learned this from a CivDiv video, but the Kurds feel as though, based off of the information we got from the CivDiv video, the Kurds feel as though they had been absolutely left out to dry by the USA from previous engagements, especially against Turkey. It's been reported that the US has tried to get the Kurds already to do a ground invasion into Iran, so the US basically doesn't have to get their hands dirty, if you will. The US doesn't have to put boots on the ground. And the Kurds denied it and said, no, you left us out to dry already. We're not doing this again. So the Kurds don't trust the United States government. I do believe if the US put boots on the ground, that would convince the Kurds to come to the table, which rightly so. The Kurds are like, hey, we've lost countless lives. Basically, while you said you would support us and you left us, we're not going to go in unless you go in. You go in first, and then we'll come in. I think that's fair of the Kurds to ask, even though they're not asking that outright. But I feel like that's kind of what they're insinuating by not invading Iran on just the U.S.'s wishes. Israel not supporting a ground invasion is one of the most absurd things I think I've heard. It's arguable that a large percentage of the reason we're fighting in Iran right now at all is because of Israel. So if the most efficient way to end the war, end the conflict, end the tension and fighting in the region is a ground invasion, Israel better be ready to step up to the plate and help the United States, because the United States has helped Israel every step of the way when they asked for it. It's got to be mutual. Otherwise, the public opinion of Israel is going to go down even further, which we all know is at an all-time low right now. And then our friend here in the video mentioned how long this 1,700-kilometer coastline is of Iran, and how it's not feasible to basically protect this as with the American Navy and Air Force. I do disagree with that. We have much more coastline than that in the United States or surrounding the United States coastlines, and I would say they're pretty locked down. I think the U.S. Navy and Air Force are unmatched, and they could definitely lock down 1,700 kilometers of coastline. May it be stretched thin? Maybe, but I think there's enough assets, there's enough technology, there's enough personnel that it could happen. It would be a massive feat, but it could happen. But I don't think they would have to secure the coastline necessarily if there was an invasion, because if they invade into Iran from the coastline and basically start pushing Iran in towards Tehran, the capital, which is more central Iran, and then the IRGC kind of starts to consolidate into central Iran, we have there's less reason to be securing the coastline, because the majority of Iran's fighting force is in central Iran at that point. But right now, as it stands, the coastline's the main issue, because that's where Iran is basically keeping a lot of their assets to put pressure on the Strait of Hormuz and the shipping routes, and their neighboring countries and the U.S. Navy. So right now, yes, the coastline is one of the main issues, if not the main issue. But when there's a full scale invasion, man, it won't be the main issue anymore. So this is definitely a controversial topic. I know we've talked about it multiple times, and it seems to be pretty split in the comments. I get about 60%, I would say, people who agree with me, 40% who don't, which is fine. I like talking about it in the comments. I think this idea that if you disagree with somebody on a matter like this, that you have to hate them and unsubscribe and then start talking shit about them is ridiculous. You can have educated conversations with someone if you disagree on a point or disagree on a policy or something like that. That's kind of how adults work, and I think that's how adults grow, and that has been lost, I think, in recent years, because people now are like, somebody says one thing that they disagree with on media, on the news, on whatever it is, and they're like, they hate that person. They're like, nope, he's a Trumper, he's a Trump supporter, or nope, he's not a Trumper, he's not a Trump supporter. It's like, bro, I was just talking about Iran, right? So, anyways, let me know what you guys think. Very crazy stuff going on right now. This was a longer video because we talked through a lot of it, but I think it's important. So that's all I got. I love you guys. We'll see you in the next one.